2, 1. Professor Martin Green, you are the Chief Executive of Care England. Welcome back to the Care Home Show.
Thanks, Simon. Pleased to be here.
It's good to see you again. So, most people will of course know you and Care England, but for anyone who isn't aware of what it is you're up to in the world, tell us about the purpose of Care England and give us a bit of an insight around exactly what it is that the charity does.
Well, we're a representative body for care providers, and what we try and do is represent the views of care providers to critical decision makers. So that includes politicians, it might include people in places like the Department of Health and Social Care, NHS England, but also at a local level to local authorities and also to many local communities. So our role is very much about representing the sector. Beyond that, of course, we also provide a range of very good services to our members, so a lot of information services. We also respond to consultations that government put out for the care sector, and there are also a range of very tangible things that our members get, which hopefully will help them to save money, and through saving money they can then invest in their care services. So I think we have a role which is representing the sector, we have a role which is raising the profile of the sector, and we have a role of delivering some direct services and support to people who deliver care.
So it's a very important job, all things being told. So tell me, quite a lot's been happening since we last sat down. But so tell me, what's been going on in your world? Sorry, since we last spoke.
Well, of course, the big thing is that since we last spoke, we have a new government with a significant majority. We have got past the hurdle of the formal Brexit from the European Union. Though, of course, what we should remember, we might have got past the formal Brexit hurdle, but there is still a lot of negotiating to do. What I've been very heartened by is the way in which the new government has really clearly shown that social care is a priority for it, and there are some significant plans that the government are developing at the moment, which are in, I think, 3 strategic areas. So the first thing that the Prime Minister is very focused on is what is the offer of social care to citizens, and he is a bit irritated, I think, by the constant focus on the money rather than the outcomes and the service. And I think it's good that he's focusing on that objective of what's this all about, what is our offering to citizens. I think he's also understood that there is an immediate challenge, which is the funding of social care. So I look forward to some money that will be put into the system to stabilise social care. Now, beyond that, he has a very clear vision that he wants a long-term and sustainable funding for social care, and that's going to take a little bit longer. And in fact, in his interview, in the recent interview with the BBC, he talked about towards the end of the year and the end of the Parliament. Now, I think what he means by that is that he's not ignoring the immediate problem, and he has a strategy on that. But for the longer term, he knows it will take a little bit longer to formulate something that will go well beyond the life of his government. So on all those levels, I think we're seeing some movement.
Mm. How does that feel from your perspective? Because obviously there's been lots of bluster about the social care world and not an awful lot of action. What's your perspective on the kind of what's been said so far, and how do you feel about what's been said so far?
Well, first of all, I have to put my cynicism aside because there have been lots of bluster, and we've had lots of governments who have been talking about this for a long time. So it's now 21 years plus since Tony Blair said he would solve it, and we're 5 prime ministers later. But parking that issue, what I would say is I'm quite heartened by the interactions I've had with government so far, because the pace of this initiative seems to be gathering quite a lot of speed, and also there seems to be a longer term view about how they want to fund and secure the future of social care. So on many levels, I'm quite heartened by the conversations thus far, but I'm not naive enough to believe that this is something that is going to be a long haul, and it's going to take a lot of energy and creativity to make sure that we get something that is long term.
Sure. I mean, it's great to hear that you're heartened by the situation. I think it's with all the bluster that there has been, to hear some type of let's call them green shoots of positivity for the situation sounds good. The Conservative Party seem to be they seem to be acting quite assertively. So obviously one would hope that that kind of early stage of assertiveness is carried forward and that some developments are made. But it's never going to be a straightforward process, and it's not going to be it will be a long road to any type of let's call it transformation for the sector?
I agree it will be a long road, but of course the issue about a government being assertive, any government with an 80-seat majority can afford to be assertive. And also as citizens, we would expect a government that has a majority to start formulating policy and delivering it. So there is nowhere to hide. And just prior to the election, of course, the Prime Minister talked a lot about political consensus. Well, I've made very clear that any government that has an 80-seat majority does not need to seek consensus. What it needs to seek is a clear vision and a delivery plan, and that's what we expect from a government with an 80-seat majority.
The key word there is the delivery side of things, isn't it? It's going out there and making it happen. So let's hope that's what is happening. So what would you like to see the government do? What would you like to see them tackle from a social care perspective? What does that look like?
Well, the first thing I want them to do is deal with the immediate crisis, and we have really clearly seen there is an immediate crisis. They've had all the evidence of that. They've had it from their regulator, the Care Quality Commission, who 2.5 years ago talked about the sector being at a tipping point. So there is a crisis, and I want them to acknowledge that. Then what I want them to do is to put in a significant amount of money that will stabilise social care, and I'm talking in terms of about £4 to £5 billion. Now, this might seem an enormous amount of money, but given the amounts of money they've allocated to the health service, and given the interdependency between health and social care, they will have to start putting some money in if their objectives for the NHS are going to be delivered. When they have put that money in to stabilise the system, I then think two things need to happen. First of all, they need to develop their long-term strategy, and that needs to be about a dialogue with citizens and with the sector. The dialogue needs to first of all start with what is the vision for social care, and then it needs to go on to how will that be delivered and what will be the outcomes for citizens and for the system. And from that, you'll be really clear about the amounts of money that are needed, and the conversation then has to be who is paying for that, what bit is going to come from taxation, what bit is going to come from the citizen.
Got you. That makes a lot of sense. So. Now, we obviously live in a post-Brexit world. Can you share your view around what living in a post-Brexit world means for the social care sector and the kind of impact of it, if you like?
Well, the first thing to say is we are past the point where we have formally left the EU, but we are not at the end of the negotiation phase. So we are still, in some ways, in a place of flux, and there is a lot of uncertainty. But in the longer term, I think there will be opportunities for the care sector, and it will be about, for example, issues around staffing. Rather than just having the EU to attract staff from, we should be able to see a global development of staff from overseas. What we also need to see, though, is enough money in the care sector so that we can grow and develop our staff from in-country people as well. And I particularly want to see more emphasis on this in education. I was reminded yesterday, actually, in a meeting I was at, that there are lots of people who are doing health and social care BTEC qualifications, but what we haven't done is we haven't translated that into loads of younger people going into care.
Sure.
So as a care sector, we need to recognise that staffing is one of our biggest issues. We need to think about how we are open to overseas recruitment, but we also have to have really clear strategies to make this an attractive place for younger and indeed for older workers to work in. So a lot of work's got to be done on the quality of the work and the experience of the staff. So I think we've got a lot of challenges, but we've also got some significant opportunities.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you think what should care business owners be most cognizant of kind of moving forward, if you like?
Well, I think their biggest challenge at the moment is funding and staffing. Now, if you'd asked me about 16 months ago, I would have said funding was the priority and staffing the next level priority. But I think that has now changed, and I notice there are so many care providers who have real challenges both recruiting and retaining staff, and particularly retaining staff in specialist posts. So the challenges of getting, for example, nursing is very great. Also, some of the money that's gone into the NHS will make that worse, because the NHS will become a more attractive place to work, and that will inevitably put pressures on social care. So I think in response to that, social care providers need to start thinking about what they offer to staff, and thinking about how they make that work high quality work and really attract people to the profession. And some of that will be about flexibility, some of that will be about autonomy, some of that will have to be about pay and conditions. But I think we have to work together to get a package together. We can't replicate the pay and conditions in the NHS. There is not the money. So what we've got to do is bring together a whole raft of things that make this a good sector to work in. And actually, there is a lot of evidence that it is a good sector to work in, and that people get tremendous outcomes from working in this sector.
I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because typically, I think care providers generally do a good job of looking after their people. There's probably opportunities to do better, of course. I mean, it's not to say that that there aren't opportunities to be able to do better, but I think the sector in many ways it's really quite humble sector. They're not necessarily good at shouting about what they're great at as well, which is it's almost like a missed opportunity, isn't it? Because from an employer brand perspective, if you like, if you've got a real team environment, if you're great at mentoring people and looking after people and developing people and creating a culture within the organisation where people they feel part of something really quite special, it's fantastic. But if the people outside of the organisation, if they don't know anything about that, then how are they ever going to kind of connect the dots? And I can't remember the figures on the shortfall. Maybe you can help me out on that. But we need an awful lot more people operating in the sector than we do as there is at the moment, which is obviously it's a big part of the battle, of course.
No, and I think, there's very clear evidence. Carol Jagger from the University of Newcastle said that we would need, within the next 15 years, probably about 600,000 extra staff to deal with the increase in demographics. But I think the point you make, Simon, is a really important one. I go around and I see so many care providers, and they are doing really brilliant things, and they're really connecting with their colleagues, and they're developing a very good quality work experiences, but we don't tend to shout about it. And actually that's a really good challenge for me at Care England, because we need our providers to talk about it, but we need also representative bodies like ours to be in the vanguard of talking up this sector. And so we all need to be singing from the same hymn sheet about the good quality experience of working in good organisations, and also the joy of being able to transform lives, and the satisfaction levels people get are absolutely phenomenal. And I often think about care work is probably one of the most challenging and difficult places to work, but it's also one of the most rewarding, and people can really feel they're making a difference in people's lives. So I think we need to shout about that more.
I definitely agree that. It's one of the so Neil Eastwood, who I know that you know, does a huge amount of work in the recruitment side of the social care world, and I think one of the stats that he released on the last show that we did together, I can't remember the figure, I think it was 18, it was either 18 or 36, I'll have to go back and go and double check, whatever the actual figure was. So he did he asked 300 different operators to say, pick your superhero carer and tell me what their background was, what their reason for coming into care was, and whatever the figure was, whether it was 18 or 36, it was significantly above any of the other areas, and it was from having had a personal experience. So they'd already had that almost like the emotional payoff of getting to look after somebody and to care for somebody and to improve the quality of their life, and that directed them into wanting to then doing that as a profession and as a career, which is, it's wonderful. But again, the how do we get that message out to people that's if you've had that type of an experience, or even if you haven't, that this could be a wonderful place for you to work and to be able to contribute.
Well, I think it's a really good point that a lot of people do come into the profession because of a personal experience. I think where we as a sector have been quite deficient is that we haven't targeted those people. So, for example, there are lots of people who had caring responsibilities, and for various reasons those responsibilities have changed or have stopped, and they have so much experience, but so much empathy and so many good values that they could bring to our profession. And what we need to do is nurture them. I'm also very interested about the way in which care can be a really good place for people to excel, often people who failed in the education system. So I had a brilliant conversation recently with somebody who told me that all throughout her life at school she had been told she wasn't good at things, and suddenly she came into the care service and she was being told by her colleagues, by the people she supported, that she was actually brilliant at it. And that had given her so much satisfaction, and it had transformed her life in the same way she was transforming the people who she was supporting's lives. And I thought to myself, what a good example that was of somebody who, in a sense, had been written off by the education system, but had such amazing skills and such brilliant values and could make a difference to our sector. And those people we need to also reach out to.
Definitely. What a heartwarming story. It's lovely to hear those types of things, isn't it? So it's interesting. I've got a guest of mine that's coming on in the not too distant future. I won't disclose. No spoiler alerts today. But this particular individual is now the CEO of a care group. Started out as a care worker. So obviously that's that's not an easy journey, but it proves that it can be done, that there is career progression there. Obviously, maybe in smaller businesses, then the opportunities might be somewhat limited. But there are opportunities for qualifications, opportunities for skills and experience. Whether you stay in the sector or whether you don't stay in the sector, being around. I don't know what the average tenure is of a millennial or kind of a younger generation or even an older generation these days. But even some type of tenure where if it's the right type of person and they're kind of delivering value and kind of the right type of contribution to themselves, to their team, to the residents or the people that they're looking after, it's going to make a big difference. And if the facts are right that it's 600,000 people, it's no small number.
No, exactly. But one of the things that's great, we are probably one of the few sectors that can offer people a job for life. Because if you look at the demographics, we are always going to need good quality care workers. What, of course, we can't do is say that it will be in the same organisation. But we have so many opportunities in our sector, and I don't think we also are very good at talking about the diversity of that. So we have a lot of really good care-facing roles, but we also have really great roles in things like hospitality. And when I go to these amazing care homes, and I go so often to brilliant care homes, what's so good is to see things like the way in which the support and ancillary staff are really connected to what the service is about. And I went into a really lovely party recently, and what was great, there were the ancillary staff, the cleaning staff, the administrative staff, and they were all there celebrating somebody's 100th birthday and really enjoying that, and recognizing as well that cleaners and hospitality staff are so important to the quality of life of the person who is in that care setting. And those people are really unsung heroes, along with our fantastic care staff. Now, in all those areas, there is real opportunity for career progression. So we need to get those messages out to more and more people.
Definitely. Had Avnish Goyal on recently, and we were talking about a story that we both like. I'm sure you will have heard of, but I'll reshare it anyway because it's a good one. But I think it was JF Kennedy was going around one of the NASA space stations, and he was kind of asking people what they were doing, and the janitor responded. We said, "We're putting a man on the moon." The whole the mentality of the team is we've all got our own individual contributions, and we're all making sure that happens. And I think it's so pertinent to the sector, because you could be in a janitorial role or some type of clerical or administration role, or somebody in the kitchens or whatever it might be. You're still making people's lives better. It's still such a valuable contribution.
No, exactly, and that notion of teamwork, and Avnish is really good at doing that at Hallmark. You know, I've been to sessions where Hallmark staff have been together, and there's a real feeling of a team that supports each other as well as supporting the people that are in their services, and that really helps to give a better quality to the work. It makes people feel part of something. And as you feel part of something, inevitably your well-being increases. And if you have a good experience as a worker, you're going to transfer that good experience to the people you support. And you will never get good services from people who are being treated badly. And I think we all as employers should remind ourselves of that.
Definitely. Me and my team spend a lot of time on helping care businesses with company culture, and there's the simplistic way to kind of to describe the return on investment is if you create the right culture where everyone's got buy-in and the team are acting more purposefully, they're going to experience greater well-being. And why would you want to leave if you're part of this fantastic group of people that's doing such important work? Obviously, with recruitment and retention being such a big challenge, the cost and the time, of course, as well, is going to be that should come down. I know Angela Boxall, the COO of Majesticare, was saying quite recently in a workshop that we did that they've spent a huge amount of time working on their culture. I think the cost of recruitment and retention for them is, I think, if I remember correctly, I think it's less than half the national average, which a business that size it's a lot of money that can then be reinvested into the business. Of course, you look after people better. The team feel more fulfilled in what they're doing. They're always going to end up looking after the residents better because they're a more cohesive team. It's a more consistent team, and the two offshoots from that is you're likely to get far greater CQC reports because people are getting looked after better, and then your reputation in the community that you serve gets better as well. So opportunities to increase occupancy and all of that type of stuff. It kind of touches upon everything, and it makes sense. It just makes sense across all planes. So.
No, well, it does. And of course, what it is a real reflection of the values of social care. And the values of social care that we direct to the people we support are also the values that we should be absolutely ingrained in the way we support our colleagues. And, that example from Majesticare is a really good example because the amounts of money that you have to spend when there is a lot of staff turnover can then be reinvested in the delivery of a quality offering to both the residents, their families, and also the staff. And so there are so many wins. I also want to say that we should think about getting more flexible in how we offer work. So increasingly, I think there are people who could make a great contribution. They might be, for example, early retired people or whatever, who might not want to work full-time but might have a contribution to make. And I think we could start seeing, particularly with the advent of technology which help with rotoring, etc., we could see much more flexibility around how we offer work. The benefit of that as well is then you create your own bank of staff that can fill at times when there is a challenge, somebody being ill or whatever. So that again will reduce the amount of dependency on agency, and that will have a really positive impact on the business, which then can reinvest its money in the quality of the care.
Definitely. We took a slight tangent to go and talk kind of people type stuff. We were kind of in the thick of a conversation around the Brexit side of things. So I'm gonna come back in on that for a second. But I'm an eternal optimist. So I'm always looking to try and find the good in things. And you kind of touched upon it a little bit, but I'd like to hear your opinion on so in the kind of post-Brexit world, if you will, what are the opportunities? Where can we see the good in the situation? Because I know a lot of people are fearful and frustrated and kind of a mixture of all sorts of different things, but where there's always opportunities with these types of things. So yeah, what's your opinion on that?
Well, I think there are opportunities, and I think it's like everything. Whatever the world throws at you, the challenge is how you find your way through it and round it, and how you get the best out of it rather than the worst out of it. There are certainly some challenges, but there are also some opportunities. So, for example, on overseas recruitment, we'll be able to think, well, we can now have the world as a potential place for us to get good people to help and support our services. There may also be some opportunities when we have new trade deals with people to reduce commodity prices. So I think there will inevitably be some challenges, but there will be opportunities. But I go back to the point that life throws many challenges at you, and the people who succeed are the ones who don't see it as the reason to stop, but they see it as the reason to be creative, innovative, and find their way through to the other side, which will then be very advantageous to them.
It's all about taking ownership for situations and things, and having that long-term view and thinking to yourself, okay, how do we make this how do we make this work, and how do we make it work in our favour as well, for the betterment of the sector. So I guess how Brexit unfolds over the next kind of coming years and things will impact this on some level. But tell me about your kind of vision for the future of care. When you sit and contemplate the sector in the future, what do you see?
Well, I think we're going to have a very much more flexible approach to care, and I'd like to see care providers developing their model so that they're offering a range of things to local communities that might be lower level preventative services. Now, the beauty for that is that will help people to engage with the care provider. It will provide the care provider with a stream of people who might use their services further down the line. It will also diversify the funding base, so there'll be other opportunities to get income for your services from these other services that you might develop at the side of care. So I think it's going to be a landscape that's evolving. Now, many care providers are already doing these things, and I think we should acknowledge that and applaud them for it. But I think in the future, what I want to see is this become the norm rather than the exception. And so, of course, it will also be very based on where your services are. So having an eye to what's going on in your locality and thinking about how you can deliver services that support people. I think the other thing that the care sector needs to do is be mindful of how much money has gone into the NHS. And what we have to do is develop services whereby we might be able to draw down some of that money, which will help the sustainability of our businesses.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you think, what needs to change from a policy perspective and then from kind of an operational perspective to make your vision of care a reality, do you think?
Well, I think we don't need necessarily more policy. What we need is culture change, and some of that culture change, I'm afraid, has to come from the NHS. The NHS is an incredibly large bureaucracy, and it has become very focused on the bureaucracy, not the outcomes. And people need to remember that the NHS is a mechanism to deliver things for citizens. It is not an end in itself. And I want it to move away from this focus on process and organisations, and I want to remind itself that it's about people and outcomes, and we are all in the space where if we can deliver the outcomes for our citizens, we should be given an opportunity to do so. Now, of course, people will then jump up and down and say, oh, he's talking about privatising the NHS. My view on that is I'm talking about getting better outcomes for citizens. And I would also remind people that the NHS in large part is already privatised because it is full of GPs who are private contractors on contract to the NHS, just as social care providers are. So there is no reason why the NHS should not adopt the same policy with the social care sector as they adopt with GPs. Yeah,
definitely. Do you, from a cultural perspective, how far away are we from them, the health service kind of having that type of let's say paradigm shift?
We're a million miles from it, and it was a good example this morning. I went into a meeting in the Department of Health to talk about an initiative that was going to transform health for people in care homes. The first thing I was told was, we are an organisation that's going through a reorganisation. So I told them, so is Apple, but my telephone still works. So there is an issue about how they keep the show on the road at a point when they're reorganising. Now, interestingly, if you're a social care provider and you're going through a reorganisation, the regulator doesn't give you any time to say, let us breathe. They say, you are here to deliver quality, and your reorganisation is something that you have to deal with, but it mustn't impact on the end user. Well, the same thing needs to be told to the NHS. The other challenge is that the NHS does not seem to be very good at creating some clear measures, some milestones, and also some policies on how to deal with people who don't deliver what they've asked them to deliver. So this morning, I was asking questions about what were the targets, what were the measures, what were the time frames, what were the budgets, and none of those questions were answered. Now, if you're trying to do something that's paradigm shifting, I would suggest that you have to get all those ducks in a line. So you have to get your vision, you have to get your objectives, you have to get your measures, you have to get your budgets, and you have to get your time frames clear. And then you will see where you are on the line of progress. And unfortunately, this is not the way the NHS has worked in the past. But if it's going to be fit for purpose in the 21st century, deliver outcomes to citizens. And incidentally, citizens don't sit in a silo. They work with the NHS, they work with social care providers, they do things like go to their supermarkets and their banks. And what we need to understand is that all the bits of the system need to work together and focus on the outcomes to the citizens.
Very much so, very much so. From your perspective and kind of from your network of care business operators, you touched upon models of care. I guess that's something that care business owners can kind of take ownership for themselves. What are you seeing work? Where are you? What do you see that's kind of inspiring you and giving you kind of hope for new care models for the future?
Well, I'm certainly seeing real improvements in quality. As I'm going around, I'm seeing care services that understand that their role is about giving people a life, not a service. And I go into care homes where I talk to residents and I see that for myself. So a good example of this was I was talking to a resident recently who had lived in her own home for the last 11 years. Her partner had died, she'd had a stroke, and she was living a very, very closed life, never going out, having some support from the local authority, but it was very minimal. And I talked to her about the transition into a care home. And she was great because she said to me, well, I thought it was the end of my life. And she said, I've now been here 14 weeks and I realise it's the beginning of a new chapter. So she said to me, I did something that I haven't done for 14 years. I went out and bought new clothes. She said, when I arrived here, I realised how shabby I'd become. I realised that the people in this care home were really great in terms of looking to their appearance. So she said, when I said this to the care worker said, well, let's go out and buy some new clothes. So this was something that had changed her life because what it had done, it had reinforced her identity and enabled her to feel proud of who she was, which had not been delivered when she was in a community setting. So I see lots of examples of that. Now, on a bigger level, what I'm also seeing is care homes that are understanding that there are a multiplicity of needs out there in the community and they're supporting them. So care homes, for example, that are providing really good quality care to their residents, but they're also centres of local communities. So people who might be living with a relative who's living with dementia are coming into the care home to get respite care, to get advice, to get support. Care homes are providing that. They're charging that quite usefully, so it's another stream of income. But the impact it's having on the people living in those communities is enormous. So I was talking to a woman whose husband was living with quite advanced dementia, and she was having problems because he had very nocturnal patterns. She'd agreed with the care home that for 2 nights he would go into the care home. And she said to me, what was great was the care home also said to her, if you have a crisis, ring us. And she said to me, I've never actually had to do it, but the knowledge that I can gives me so much comfort and peace of mind. Now that is such a small thing, but it's made such a big difference. And so care homes have the real opportunities to be the centres of the management of long-term conditions in local communities. And when I was talking to that lady, I know that when her husband is in need of full-time long-term care, she will want him to go to that care service because it knows her husband and because she trusts it and has built up a relationship with it and the staff. So these are the sorts of initiatives that we need to think about in the care sector to broaden what we do and to make our services more available to the community. That has benefits to the community, but it also has benefits to us as sustainable organisations.
Definitely. I spend my life speaking to operators and business leaders, and a lot of time in homes speaking to everyone from kind of throughout the sector, if you will, and plenty of residents too. I hasten to add, and I think what you're saying is absolutely correct. I think the homes that are, to the extent that the home is embedded in the local community, and they're engaging with the local community, there's this is somewhat anecdotal from kind of what I've seen, but the ones that are the most embedded in the local community are the ones that are the thriving hub within the community are the most successful.
Absolutely.
And it's because they're taking a whole community approach. They're getting people in from the community that might not have had any reason to engage with a care home, but it's I guess in a kind of business term you kind of call it brand building and reputation and all of those things. But if you're touching people and you're making people's lives better that aren't anything to do with necessarily the people that you're looking after that live in your care home at the time, that can only be a good thing. The perception of care is obviously I think it's improving over time. I'd like to think that that the narrative is kind of going in the right direction, but largely I think a lot of people see a care home as being a kind of dreadful place where you buy into the kind of the media narrative, some certain media narratives. That's your way to overcome that, and to assertively do that in a way which, again, it benefits everyone involved. To your point, it works from a business, from a commercial perspective as well. But you're just doing a better job of looking after people and getting involved in a community, which is important to humans generally.
No, well, exactly, and I mean that was one of the reasons why Care England, with others like NAPA and NCF, decided to develop the Care Home Open Day, because we knew that there were lots of communities where if the care home opened themselves to the community, there'd be huge benefits to the residents and also to the local community. And I've seen some great examples of the ways in which that's done, and not in a forced way. So another good example from Hallmark actually was they have a fantastic care home in Wimbledon, and it has an art gallery where residents have done art, and this is displayed in the service, and people from outside come to see the art. Now that makes it something that people want to do. It also provides real opportunities for local people to meet people in the care home, friendships develop. And so these are small things on some level, but they're absolutely paradigm shifting in terms of getting the public to understand what goes on in a care home, and also to make the fear of care homes sort of ebb away, because people see the reality of care homes rather than just what they think, rather than what actually is happening. And of course, we as a sector have been on a journey, and if you look at care homes 30, 40 years ago, well, we wouldn't have wanted to be in them. But look at care homes now, and it's a completely transformed experience.
Definitely. Coming back to the recruitment challenges specifically as well. Your brand, your employer brand, how people talk about you, your reputation, all of those types of things. If people know that you've got a wonderful home where great things happen and there's a positive energy and things like that, that's only going to serve the recruitment challenges in a positive way as well, because people are saying good things about your home and about what goes on inside it as well. So
yeah, very much so.
I know that you're big on technology and big on innovation for the future of the sector. What do you see as, from a care business owner's perspective, what do they need to be thinking about relevant to innovation, or where are the opportunities, do you think?
Well, I think we've got to embrace technology, not least of which because there are going to be so many people who need care and support. But what I would say is the first technologies we should be developing are the ones that improve the quality of life for the person who uses the service. All too often, technology has been used to police the workforce, and I think, domiciliary care services where the local authority has said, we must have a system that tells me whether this care worker went in at 9 o'clock or 1 minute past 9, completely forgetting that the purpose of that visit was to ensure that that person had a better experience who was using the service. So what I want us to do is, first of all, to develop technologies that help people live well. Now, again, I've seen some great examples of this, quite low level, not really expensive, but transformational in terms of the resident experience. So again, I keep mentioning the Hallmark example, but I was at the opening of their new home last week, and I saw examples of how people will get out of bed and the light will come on, so that gives them the access to the bathroom. Now, these are incredibly useful but technologically based systems that are not hugely expensive, and particularly when you put them in at the point of building the care home. So I think we've got to look at technology in that way. There's also a piece whereby we can improve integration. So, for example, things like Fitbits that transfer data about the person's health to health professionals, so that when you see changes, people can put in proactive support at a very early stage. Now, a good example of this, I was in a care home in Lincolnshire where they had Fitbits. There was a man who had advanced dementia. He had very, very agitated patterns, and he suffered tremendously from urinary tract infections. Now, this had resulted in 8 hospital visits in the space of 11 months. When he had his Fitbit, they noticed that slight increases in temperature were the prelude to a UTI. So they put in proactive medicine, and that person never went to hospital again and was able to live well in his care setting and actually die in his care setting. Now, that is a simple piece of technology, but the impact on the user was enormous. But also there was an impact on the system. You know, endless A&E visits are really bad for the person. They're really bad for the system. This was simple technology that stopped all that. So there's a lot of technology that we use. Also things like how to transfer information, getting social care onto NHS Mail, which is something we're very interested in doing, helps to transfer information. The more we transfer information, the more we can deliver more appropriate care for the individual.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of this stuff, it exists. These are things that are relatively simple in the grand scheme of things. But to your point, they make a massive impact. I mean, you think about the lights to help make sure that people can get to the bathroom. Okay, that technology's been around for years and years and years. The application is comparatively new, but whatever the stats are, I'm sure they're significant, but helping make sure that people don't trip and fall. It's obviously the negative the detriment of that is obviously significant. So again, just a simple innovation making such a big difference. So.
Well, one of the other things I want to do, and why we're developing the tech bricks, is to get care providers in a room with technology people. Because one of the things that I often hear from care providers is they say to me, but the system doesn't quite do what I want it to. Well, if you can get in a room with a techie and you tell a techie what you want to achieve, 99% of the time they will come up with a solution. And so I think one of our roles at Care England is to get the sector and technology providers together so that whenever we see a challenge, we can say, how do we get some technological piece of equipment or service that will help us to support that person in a more effective way, and also help us to do that more efficiently. And of course, some of these new technologies like pressure pads and lights and stopping falls, etc., they also have the added benefit of not disturbing people in the night. There was that old adage where you used to have to go around every hour to make sure people were okay. Well, would you want your bedroom door opened every hour? Well, I certainly wouldn't want
Definitely
mine.
not.
So these technologies will really help to improve efficiency, but also improve the experience of the person in the service as well.
I think that's a really, really good point as well. I mean, think about sleep is almost like the elixir of life. If you're being interrupted, even if you don't wake up every time, but if you're woken up twice in the night, what's the likelihood that your quality of sleep is going to go down quite dramatically? Significant. We all know that we're not on our A game when we haven't had a good night's sleep, and if that's happening consistently, then that's going to build up over time. And the best case scenario is that you're going to be a bit grumpy. The worst case scenario is that you're not going to be maybe as cognizant as you might be otherwise, and again, it may lead to an accident occurring, which, if you can avoid that, of course, it makes for a tremendous difference on the individual, of course.
Of course, some of this also very low-level technology can do things like test people's quality of sleep. Now, that's something which, if you do that in a care home setting, you might then be able to adjust things like meal times or how you have that downtime before you go to bed to enable people to have better sleep. So sometimes, if we know what the challenge is, we can find a solution to it, and technology is going to help us to identify some of the issues, and then we as care providers are very good at then saying, well, there are things we're going to try to make this better for the resident.
Definitely. As a sector, I don't think that we've been the quickest off the mark, let's say, from a technological perspective, if you will. What concerns do you have around technological adoption?
Well, I think the problem is as well that we haven't been encouraged to do it. So, for example, when they wanted technology in the NHS, they put bucket loads of money into the NHS to facilitate it. I think also people need to understand that technology has now got to a stage where it's much more user-friendly. So when the things like the mobile phone first came out, sometimes they weren't very user-friendly, and I found that I struggled. Now, when my iPhone, I voice type absolutely everything. I give voice commands, and so the technology itself has become easier to use, but I don't think we've got that message out very effectively. And I think we need to get the message out that technology can make a difference, it can produce better outcomes, it can produce better efficiencies, and also we want it to be easy to use. Nobody is going to use something that's difficult and complicated. So that's a challenge to the technology sector, that when you come up with a solution, don't make it so that you have to be Einstein to use it. Make it so that people like me can use it and colleagues in care services can use it.
Yeah, definitely. You might have touched upon this already, but what technology for the sector are you most excited about?
Well, I'm excited about some of the stuff that will give us, for example, good audit trails about how people have been supported. So I'm excited about things that improve the quality of life for residents, but I'm also excited about things that prove that we have delivered our outcomes, prove that we have an audit trail for doing it, but also I'm very excited by how we can use data as part of our planning and development process. Now, increasingly, because of technology, we're becoming a much more data-rich sector, but our next challenge is how do we use that data, how do we interpret it, and how do we make it have an impact on the quality, the outcomes, and the efficiency of our services. So those areas really excite me.
Because you've got initiatives within Care England focused on digital technologies. Daniel Casson is working on that side of things, and then you've got things like the Care Innovation Hub as well, who are looking at, I guess, kind of the more embryonic end of the spectrum. But yeah, I think the more people that are focusing on this, the better. And from an adoption perspective, hopefully more conversations will mean higher adoption, people kind of getting their head round it as such and thinking, actually, you know what, this is going to make a real big difference. So it has to be on the agenda as such. So I've got one last question just before we wrap things up. So if you had one piece of advice for care leaders today, what would that one piece of advice be?
Focus on your vision for your service and focus on your vision for the sector, because when you're clear about your vision, it is much easier to deliver it. And so often I think what happens is we get very blurred about what we're trying to achieve. So be really clear about your objectives and your vision, and then think about how you operationalize that.
I think that's a cracking piece of advice. Martin Green, it's been a pleasure having you on the show again.
Thanks,
Thank
Simon.
you so much.
Thank you.